good evening, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Living the Noahide Life, live with Rabbi Moshe Shulman, who's going in depth and giving us some more details, Torah-rooted details, and the sources to give us guidance and direction for exactly how we should be living the Noahide life. And he's been explaining some of the seven of late, specifically clarifying a lot that has to do with idolatry. And it's so exciting to hear a learned rabbi share from the actual sources. It just makes all the difference, and it gives us direction for where to look and where to stay rooted in Torah and Tanakh. So I'm not going to hold you guys up anymore. Let's turn it over to the rabbi. Rabbi Shulman, how you doing tonight? I'm always joyful to have time with you.
Baruch Hashem, it's on the warm side here in New York. It looks like it's getting towards summer. So
summer, yes. And we're beautiful here in the Pacific as well.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I want to probably read something here. Okay. Let me just do a very quick review of what we had.
Right.
We're talking about actually the first of the commandments, Noahide's, the prohibition of worshiping idols. Now, we talked about that there are 4 specific acts that are considered idol worship.
Yes.
That no matter what kind of idol it is, even if that's not the kind of service that's usually done to the idol, if you do that, then you have violated the law of not worshiping idols. Okay, these 4 acts are bowing down to an idol, not bowing to a person, something like that, which is a sign of respect or whatever. Slaughtering an animal in front of the idol, like they would do in the Beis Mikdash. Likewise, burnt offerings or incense or sacrificing that is the third one. Anything that's some kind of an offering. There's an idol. If you throw rice to it, that you're giving an offering of rice. Whatever you do, anything that's an offering, other than slaughtering the animal to the altar, that's what it is. Slaughtering doesn't necessarily mean you're giving it to it. You're slaughtering it in the name of your idol, and then you eat it. But sacrificing would mean is you're giving it actually into there. You're burning it up in front of the idol. For that, it's given to the idol. Okay. And then is to offer what's called a libation. I love these words. They make all these great words, libations. Basically, what it means is in the temple there were 2 types of things. There was oil, there was water. There was wine that was poured as a libation, and water, wine, oil, anything like that was it. As long as you pour any, even if it's not the idol's specific type of worship, that would be considered an idol worship. So, for example, just thinking about just talking, my understanding of the way the Eucharist works is that you pour wine and you give it as sort of an offering of some sort, since, as we know, of course, shittiv is forbidden as worship. That would be a forbidden type of worship, actually, under that kind of a category, for example. Now, we're going to find out that, by the way, a lot of the things that the Torah talks about that are idol worship, different types of idol worship, aren't very relevant. You see a lot of people talk about there's one mitzvah, there's a whole bunch of mitzvahs. Well, you don't have a whole bunch of mitzvahs, but these things are under the general. You see how it works. They really are under these general categories. So if you do that kind of thing. Now, then there is, these are the 4 general things. No matter what the idol is, if you do any of these 4, then you're in a violation. Now, there is another violation with worship, and that is to worship the idol in the manner that is common for that idol. So the one that's brought in the Talmud is there was a Greek god Mercury, that the way of worshiping it was actually to throw stones at it. So if it was stones at Mercury, the idol Mercury, you would be violating this commandment. If you threw stones at a crucifix or something like that, you wouldn't be violating this commandment, because that's not the type of worship. So even if if you do something that's even considered something like a negative, and he was bezoyan, like a shaming of something, to denigrating something. But if that would of course not be considered idol worship. But if that's a specific worship for that idol, then that is actually a violation. So it's the 4 regular things that apply to everything. And then the other thing is, if you do something that's the customary way of worshiping it, then it's a thing. So, for example, I would say, if you go to a Catholic um, church, they do a cross on themselves before Jesus as an act of worship. That would be idol worship, because according to all sources, the non-Jews are not allowed to worship in Shittif. Avoid worship. We're going to talk about Shittif again because I went over it very quick at the end. I want to put a little bit more time because I know there's people out there that make such a big thing about the idea of Shittif, and that's the difference between being a Noahide, not being a Noahide. If you believe in Shittif, I just want to be overly careful and go into clearly so that you know exactly what the issue is about Shittif. Yes, Shittif, no. Okay, now.
That makes sense, though.
That's it, yeah. Okay, and then there's another commandment. You're not supposed to believe that the idol is actually a god. Okay, because you're supposed to believe in only one God. You're not allowed to believe in another God. Okay, whether you're supposed to believe in God or not, we talked about that before, and we're going to talk about it again because there are some people who consider belief in God as being a requirement for Noahide, and they consider it as being part of the second commandment, which is cursing God or blasphemy. Okay, and the truth of the matter is, I say, if you think about it logically, it's very hard to say that you believe in the 7 laws of Noah, that you're trying to follow the 7 laws of Noah, and not believe that. Well, who gave Noah the laws? You don't believe who gave it. So
I had a debate, or I had a talk with another rabbi about that when you brought that point up the first time, and you make a convincing argument.
Yeah. Now, what there is a question is if you follow these laws as like the natural law, as to whether or not that means that you have a place to come. Okay, say because most of them you do normally. Let's say you're a vegetarian. Okay, let's say you happen to be vegetarian. Okay, you don't kill, you don't steal, you're not cursing God, you're not worshiping idols. You're not eating a limb from a living animal because you don't eat animal foods, right? So you're a vegetarian. And just as we're going to find out, the actual having courts is not really something that an individual can do. You can't force a country to make it. You're not if you were king, of course it would be a different story. If you were the king of the country, or you're the Queen of England, since the Queen of England is Queen of Canada also. She's a nice old lady. What can I tell you? So if you're a king or queen and you have that power, then it would devolve on you to make sure you did that. And you would, there are things you do as an individual, but basically that commandment is not something that as an individual you can't do. Just like, for example, there's judgments in the Torah that are mitzvahs that we're supposed to do. You're supposed to give lashes to people who do certain things. We don't have the ability to do that. Doesn't mean that the mitzvah is not. It's just we don't have the ability to. They're a mitzvah, but we just can't do it. Okay. When we discuss about that, we'll get into it more to understand it, because that's going to be more theoretical than practical. Although there are some practical things that I think a person can do in order to do things related to that. So anyways, there is a discussion is whether or not you need to actually believe that it's from Hashem, or you're doing it just because it's natural law. Now, the Rambam and many other sources believe, of course, it has to be according to the Torah in order to have a place in the world to come. Some people think that it's not. It is a legitimate argument. But again, if you're calling yourself a Noahide, that means you're doing it because the mitzvahs are from B'nai Noah. And the question is, well, if the mitzvah B'nai Noah, who told Noah what he was supposed to do? His wife didn't tell him. Okay, and everybody else was wiped out. I don't think he listened to his children. So if his wife didn't tell him the children, then it's got to be somebody else, and then, of course, God. So you get God in there anyways, even if you can say, well, you don't have to believe in it. But if you're going to say you're a Noahide, you believe in Noahide laws, you're basically having to say, whether you consider it a mitzvah or not, you're basically, either you're saying you believe in God, or you're somewhat missing something upstairs, because, how can you call it Noahide laws if you don't believe it? It's sort of weird. Okay. Anyways, that's way. Okay. So, anyways, that's I believe in God. We will talk about later, and of course, we're going to talk about later about the things in Jewish belief. Now, I want to talk about Shittif, and I may just take the whole time today and talk about Shittif. I'll see how long it takes to do it, because I did talk about a little bit the theoretical part of Shittif. I also want to talk about the incarnation also, because that's very important when it comes to Shittif. There is a misunderstanding of what the actual incarnation means. So I want to deal with that. Last week we talked about what the Trinity is. I want to go back to that, and then I'll go with the incarnations. Then we'll talk about it what the views are about it. But before we do it, again, I want to emphasize that if a Jew, remember we talked about the general rule, is if a Jew gets a death penalty for it, it means a Noahide is also forbidden. A Jew is forbidden of worship in Shittif. Worship.
Yeah, you've been clear. You've been clear in your wordage.
Yeah.
Your verbiage.
This is not X% of the rabbis. This is 100% of the rabbis. There's not a question about. There's not a single rabbi who believes that worship of Shittif is allowed. That's not exist. The issue is going to be, which we're going to discuss what the things are. The issue is only with regards to belief and how actually that comes about, what the discussion is. Do they really believe it? It's a very interesting discussion, and a lot of disagreement with it.
Huge, though. It's huge for this day and age, Rabbi.
Okay, so let's discuss the inyan of Shittif, what that means again. We did discuss it a little bit last week, and as I said, in order to understand it, we have to understand Platonism a little bit, how Platonism looks at the world. Okay, Plato believed that this world was not the real world. It was more of a world of, whatever we saw. So, for example, I have a cup here. Okay, now this cup is lacking in reality. Okay, there's a real thing called the form of it that's like that. And when I discuss it, I always like to discuss it as far as mathematics is concerned, because basically in all areas of study, the only place where you actually find people who philosophically look at something as being Platonic is in mathematics, because essentially it's the only way you can understand it. So, for example, I don't have a ball around here, do I? Okay, well, this is an object. Okay, now it's rectangular here. Okay, so we say it's rectangular, has 4 right angles here, but the truth of the matter is it doesn't. If you were to look, the more that you look at it, you'd see it doesn't have any right angles there, but we will still call it a rectangle, having 4 angles. Okay. Now, the reason why I call it rectangle is because there's that idealized object called a rectangle, which has certain things defined as 4 right angles and stuff like that. We call it that. Same thing with a triangle. There's no real triangles in this world because we can't make things exactly. Even with lasers, they make it to get very close, but still there's that margin of error always that exists. It's not exact. Okay.
In nature.
Right, in nature. Okay.
Organic.
But the idea, the concept of a triangle, this is only representation of a concept that we have. That's very much what Plato is talking about. Okay, and this is very important to understand the Trinity. Okay, now the Trinity itself is not a physical thing. It's something in what we'd call spiritual world. Again, we don't know what it is, so we're trying to imagine what it is. So when we talk about things, let's talk about a book, a cipher. Okay, what makes this a cipher? Okay, there's certain things that are essential qualities to it to be a cipher. Okay, it has pages, it has something written on it, whatever it is. But for example, the color is not essential to it. It could be any color; it doesn't make a difference. To be called a book has certain things that we say that's what it is. It's the essence is the essence of it is what it is. Okay, and there's different types of book. This is one type of book. This is another type of book. But each one, their essence, what they really are, is called book. Or in Plato would say the form is what that is. And these are what was hypostasis. You've ever heard the word? This would be a hypostasis of that, okay? Throwing in that good old Catholic theology that I learned one time. That's good. Peppermint tea is very good for you. Okay, so the concept of the Trinity is like this. The essence is God. The hypostasis, like for example, different types of book, this is only 3. There's 3 thumbs. There's the Father, there's the Word, which comes from the Father. They use the term begotten, not in the sense that, had sex and came out. Begotten because begotten means that something that comes out of it in like a generative type of way. And then there's what's called the Holy Spirit, which is the third. which there's a big argument among the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic as to whether it proceeds from the Father alone or from the Father and the Son. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. But maybe when I do my thing on Tanakh Talk, when I get into, I'll go into the whole thing, just to bore you all to death. Okay, but again, we're talking about spiritual, not talking about physical. So they're not spiritual. So the way of looking at it, again, the examples I like to give is from mathematics, because mathematics is the only thing that we can relate to, which actually, if you think about it, is very Platonic. Okay, so take the number 3. Show me the number 3 in this world. Doesn't exist. 3 is a concept that exists here. It's a form. It's out there. Okay, but we have 3. Okay, for example, I have 3 books. Okay, and the number 3 is called the cardinality. So I have 3 of that. And I also have, how about this? I have 3 markers on my table behind me. How's that? So I have 3 books and 3 markers. Now, essentially, they all have, in essence, the same thing. They're all 3. But they're hypostasis in different distinctions. Okay? Now, in essence, that's what the underlying part of the Trinity is. The essence of what it is 3. The essence of what it is God. They all are God. Their essence is God. But their hypostasis, how they come out, are different. Okay? Now, I'm going to discuss this more in my Tanakh Talk when I get to the Trinity. I'll go into this a bit more, and I'll explain to you why that's actually Avodah Zarah itself, why that's not monotheism, that's actually polytheism. But that's a different story. We'll get into that. I don't want to get into that right now. But the point of the matter is that's what it is. Now, what I want to continue with is the incarnation, because the whole discussion about Shittif has to do with making an oath. That's where the discussion comes into as to whether believing it or not. Now, the incarnation is not understood. What does it mean that that's incarnated? Okay, let's go back again. This is another thing. All of this stuff, remember, all these explanations are what they explained, 1800 years ago, when they were steeped in Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy. Their concept of the world was based on that. So they explained it in that.
They're pre-cold.
And they're so close to it. Nowadays, most of these things, that's why I have to use mathematics, because otherwise there's nothing. All the other things that they explain it to don't really make sense to us. And the incarnation is not going to make sense to you, because it's one of these Aristotelian things that make no sense. Okay, so let's talk about what makes you a human. Okay, we talk about species, we talk about genera, we talk about, okay, that all comes from Aristotle. But the thing is, let's think about it a second. What makes us, we're animals like other animals, mammals like other mammals, but what makes us different? What makes us different is, according to Aristotle, is reasoning. Okay? We reason. We do a lot. Our mental capacities are different. For example, dogs are wonderful. I love. They're very loving and everything like that. They have their certain amount of intelligence, but you really cannot discuss Plato and Aristotle with your dog. I mean, there's a lot of things you could talk with your dog, but once you start talking about this kind of stuff and triangles and Plato and Aristotle, your dog's going to look at you like, what kind of an idiot, what kind of a crazy guy this? I have no clue what he wants. Just let me have my dog biscuit. So I mean, that's all I'm interested in. Okay. As humans, we are qualitatively different from animals. There are certain limitations that animals do have that we are beyond us. Animals don't have art like us. I mean, you can go into a museum. Well, modern art maybe not, but there's art, music. I guarantee you, in a million years, there will be no monkey that will make a Beethoven symphony. It is something that qualitatively humans are different. Okay, qualitatively humans are different. Okay, so what makes us human? We have these certain qualities. And Aristotle talked about reasoning is one of those. Okay. Now, in the same way, we could talk about there are certain qualities that God has, and as God has certain qualities, and certain qualities that a human being has. The concept of the incarnation is that Jesus, when he was born, had 2 natures, equal completely. He had a human nature, as being a human being. He ate, he slept, he did all kinds of things human. But he had a God nature also. 100% human, 100% God. I'll give you a very good example of that in a second. But it's not saying that that second person, that word, all automatically became a human, physical being. No. What is that second part, word, the nature of God through that was put into a human being, together with the nature of the human that the child Jesus had, and had both together as one. Okay? You're into theology. That's a pretty good example of the theology you learned. You learned that?
Well, Christianity, as far as the incarnation.
Yeah. Okay. It's the nature. Jesus has two natures, human nature and a God nature, 100% human, 100% God. Okay, that's what it is.
They teach a God man, yes, 100%.
Yeah, but his nature, not his physical body. His physical body is like a physical body, but it's 100% incarnated into it. Okay, now we'll talk again when I get to talk. I'm going to give a whole much more. Might even take me 2 or 3 weeks just to go into it because I got to get a whole bunch of books out in front of me and to read from it and stuff like that. But essentially, it is.
Rabbi, you've studied a lot. I just when you get into say Christian cults like the Mormons, and they have notions of another world or another region, and even Jehovah Witnesses, they start to get into imaginative upon imaginative upon imaginative, and there's nothing foundational. There's nothing rooted.
Yeah,
it's a belief system.
I would rather leave that kind of stuff at Tanakh Talk when we get to there. Because there I'm going to discuss the Trinity, obviously is very important because Judaism doesn't believe in it. But in order for me to tell you that I don't believe in something, I have to tell you what it is that I don't believe in.
Exactly.
And I have to convince you that I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's what the incarnation is. Now, many people don't say, how could it be possible to be 100% man, 100% God? Now, nowadays, of course, that doesn't make sense. Of course, nowadays, if somebody was 100%, basically we call that schizophrenia. Okay, that's basically what it is, the schizophrenia. Okay, but again, you have to go back to 1800 years ago. Okay, and we're living in a world like that, which has totally different conceptions of human psychology. I mean, nowadays we can actually test some of these things, and we know that those things that they believe wasn't right. But they had different type of human psychology. Okay, so the best way example is, again, I go back to mathematics because it's the closest thing to Platonic philosophy and stuff like that. It fits very well. Okay, let's take the even numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, and the odd numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. 11. Okay, now, if you don't know mathematics, I'm going to be confusing here, but that's fine. Now, if you take all the numbers out, okay, even numbers, odd are totally separate concepts. There's even and odd, they're totally different. Even the properties of even numbers. An even number times any kind of number is always even. An odd number times any kind of number could be even.
Whole numbers.
Right now, we're doing the whole numbers. I'm just doing addition, multiplication, whatever. Okay, they help. Even numbers have different properties. Odd numbers have different properties. However, if we put them all together, we have all the positive numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if you look at, say, the even numbers as being those characteristics which make up the nature of God. Just like I said, human beings are reasoning. So God has I don't know, he's knowing, he's wise, he's powerful. Let's say we have a whole bunch of things out in that way. And the even and the odd numbers are human characteristics. They can lie, they can get hungry, all those characteristics.
They can die. Yeah,
they're separate. They're separate. Yes. But if you combine them all together in one, you have 100% man, human nature, and you have 100% of God nature. It's just together in one person. You have all of them together. When you think of nature that way, that's what they're talking about. Okay? Although to us it sounds weird. It's schizophrenia, basically. You can't think that you're the Queen of England and you're the President of the United States at the same time. It's schizophrenia, okay? And that's basically not the way human nature is made up. But their psychology and understanding human nature was basically like that. So if you look at the kind of what they're trying to say is like that. That's what they mean. Okay? My point, what's very important, is when you talk about Jesus, when you talk about Jesus as God, you're not saying Jesus is God. So God is incarnated in Jesus. So the God's nature is there that's created. The second person of the Trinity is incarnated in Jesus. Okay?
Yeah, and they've got denominations on one side.
Jesus is not God. He's just a human being. But when you say that Jesus, you're really talking about. That means if you know what it is, but most Protestants know what it is, so it's basically they're all polytheists anyway. They don't know what they're doing. I'm trying to get down to what the truth is, okay? Because when we discuss about this, remember, the original discussions from the Talmud, the Tosfos, are all talking about pre-Reformation, before every idiot thought they could pick up a Bible and decide what it means, and then deciding, well, God must be this and something, without understanding what all these creeds meant, what was going behind all this kind of stuff. I've always said that the theologians in the church in the beginning were phenomenally brilliant people. They came out with all kinds of things, but it's just wrong. That's fine. This is wrong, but people could be very smart and come up with wrong ideas. I mean, we see it all over the place. Until Copernicus, who was able to show that the Earth was the sun was the center of the universe, of the Earth, everybody saw what was going on up there. But Ptolemy, they came up with these phenomenal ways of understanding how these things move around with spheres, all kinds. These were brilliant people. They were just wrong. Okay, the same thing as the church was actually wrong. But you have to understand what they're saying. So in the Middle Ages, when we're talking, the discussions of Shittif comes about. Shittif is talking about basically Christianity, what they believe. What they believe is Jesus is not this physical. He was not God. No, incarnated in him, bound all together, is in that human being was both natures of human and God.
They have a verse to that effect.
Right. And that what it is it's like it wasn't all of the three parts, all of the three hypostases, just the second one, which the reason why I use the word instead of the Son. First of all, John uses that, but also because it avoids what people sometimes think about it, which is wrong. Okay, so it's that second person which becomes incarnated. That nature for the second person gets put together with the human nature, and that's what it is. Okay, that's what Shittif means. Shittif means that you say Jesus' name, but you really mean God. But Jesus is like a Shittif. He's like joined together. He's really part with God. Okay. Really, when you mean God, you mean the essence. When you say God, you mean the essence, but the essence has three hypostases. The word, and the word becomes incarnated in Jesus. So it's all.
It's that assigning, isn't it?
It's all gobbledygook and stuff like that. It doesn't, whatever. It's like, but in a sense, once you understand what it is, I think one side says nonsense is nonsense, but the study of nonsense is science. So it's the same thing. This is nonsense, but the study of it is very interesting. Okay, but when you discuss it, you have to understand what it is. So when we talk about Shittif, I know lots of people came out of Protestantism and they were never really taught what it is. When we're talking about Shittif, this is what we're really talking about. The belief that the second person, which is second hypostasis, person doesn't mean person as in human being, but hypostasis, called the Word, becomes incarnated. That nature becomes incarnated together with a human nature, joined together, like the even odd numbers joined together into one nature, into a single. That's what it is. Now, let's forget about the fact that
deified their flesh.
Yeah, in the flesh, but it's going to join together. Okay, that's really what the theology. What's it about? And that's really what Shittif is. Doesn't mean that Jesus is God, just like the Father is a God, and there's once, and no, they're totally no. That's not what it is. That's just straight idol worship. I don't want to deal with that. That's polytheism. That has nothing to do, nothing whatsoever with it to do. The problems with that, I'll do it in my Tanakh Talk discussions. I'll show you why that's idolatry. But I just want right now, because when we're talking about Shittif is not talking about what you've been taught, or most people believe in Protestant churches. And most of the Protestant evangelists I speak of, they have no clue. When I talk to them and ask them questions, no matter how, when I ask them a question, straight polytheism. They have no clue. Okay, great polytheism. They never really learned what these words mean, how it came about, what it is. So it's great point. We're not talking about polytheism. We're talking about really, this thing. So when we're talking about the belief, as opposed to worship, the worship is no question. Again, the question is belief of Shittif. You have to know, first of all, what do you mean belief in Shittif? When I say belief in Shittif, I'm not talking about if I walked into a church, a mile or two around here, and I said, what do you believe about God? Jesus, God, what do you believe? They would say, well, Jesus is God and the Father is God. They're totally separate. You're totally separate. Well, that's polytheism. That's not even a question. It's textbook polytheism. Okay, that's not really what the Trinity is, and Shittif is, according to theology, theologians that were at the time when the Tosfos was around, because they ran into these. They know about that kind of stuff. Okay. I hope it didn't confuse you too much. I see you shaking.
Not at all. So is it the assigning? Is it the assigning of godliness or power or ascribing something to the flesh that is the shituf? Is that where the trigger happens?
No, what happens is you have the shittif is actually
A
you
partnership.
have yeah, it's a partnership. It's you have this nature which is separate really, but it's really part of a thing. The whole concept of the Trinity is three things. It comes parts of you. The whole nature is come together. It's like they're joining together. The actual mechanics of it is difficult to understand because basically it's based on a type of science which is a science which is false. Listen, Aristotelian science was also false. He believed all kinds of things that were
Pseudoscience, yeah.
yeah. Listen, when Newton came out with his idea of gravity, he was branded a heretic because he disagreed with Aristotle. Aristotle
So
felt,
was Copernicus.
yeah, Newton's the one that's the strangest to people. Newton was considered a heretic because Aristotle said that motion could only exist if there's something that's physically affecting something. And Newton said, no, there's a force called gravity that attracts like that. Okay, so that's what he's going to. And again, the science that is based on this kind of stuff is we all know is just false. It's just not true. Okay, but you have to know what it comes out because when you're talking about something. Okay, so that's what shittif means. Again, we're not talking about what you learn to evangelicals. If you believe what the evangelicals, you're not allowed to believe that it's straight polytheism. I'm not even getting it. I'm trying to get back to the type of shittif that if you'd spoken to, or say you speak to today, a Catholic of some sort. Who knows his theology, and you talk to him about that, he doesn't believe in the straight type of polytheism you find in evangelical churches. I mean, there are some evangelicals who know the theology better, so that, you might find out, but that's like one in a 10,000 or 100,000, okay? In Catholics, you go to a Catholic priest and he can explain to you what he believes. He believes in Shitta, okay? So, okay, now, again, we'll go back to it. It's important to understand that worship of Shittif is absolutely forbidden under any condition. For a Jew, there's a death penalty, no question about it. For a non-Jew, it's what the question we're going to discuss about now. Okay? Now, is it forbidden to believe in Shittif? Okay. The view that we find, let me see, the Minchas Chinuch here mentions it. I noted this. I don't know which one it is that has the best note on it. Let's go here, 132. Sometimes I get in my professor mode and I get onto these things. And
That's okay. I appreciate the way you go about it. I find the Hebrew explanation, all the way back to the Ein Sof, to the notion of the before anything, the sheer fact that Hashem rules it all and how deep it goes. How could you put plurality into the notion and call it God? I mean, that's what idolatry is. I think there's the whole root.
340. Okay. Okay. Now, I'll just read you what it says in the Minchas Chinuch. He says he gives a summary of all the things that are mentioned. Okay, so he talks about oaths, giving oaths, and he says that in the particular mitzvah, we're going to come up to this later on, swearing to an avodah zarah, that he says that there's no prohibition for making an oath for a non-Jew. However, he says, but if you worship idols with shittif, a menoch is forbidden just like a Jew. Okay, so the difference is with regards to swearing, mentioning, showing a belief in that, but worship is forbidden. I am pretty because he's warned and brings a number of sources that believe that. So the Minchas Chinuch takes the view of was probably the majority view in the rabbis in Ashkenaz in Europe. He said the truth about it on a Shvia, even the name of Avodah Zarah itself is also not a prohibition for a non-Jew. Why? Because a non-Jew, okay, swearing to an idol worship. Remember, we said the general rule is if a Jew gets a death penalty for it, a non-Jew is also forbidden. Swearing to an idol, we're going to discuss about this a little bit later, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Swearing to an idol is only subject to lashes. So that would mean swearing to an idol for a non-Jew would not be subject to anything like that. Because it's not
swearing, you mean by taking an oath.
Right, okay.
Now, can I ask, Rabbi, because evangelical circles, their ministers, when they do like an altar call and a conversion call, I even work Billy Graham crusades and stuff when I was younger. When they do an altar call, I mean, they run on this notion that you've got to believe in your heart and confess with your mouth. And that's that oath you're talking about there, I think.
Well, no, that's like an oath in the court. I'm going to get to that in a second. Now, the important point of what he's saying is here, he's taking the view that an oath is allowed for a Noahide. Now, the reason why that's important to understand is that there is a disagreement among this. And the disagreement comes about, one of the reasons for the disagreement, the Rambam would disagree. As we know, others like the Ramban and many others who are Sephardic disagree. The reason why they disagree is they do not believe in this principle, that it's only if it's a death penalty is a non-Jew, as a Noahide warned about that. Although the Talmud seems to say that, the Rambam and others seem to agree with that, disagree and seem to think that no, even something that's negatively commanded would also be not allowed for a Noahide. And the way we're going to teach this here is, in fact, I'm going to mention those things. I'm not going to say which one is which, but certainly if there's people who think you shouldn't do it because it might actually come, then I'll say you should avoid it. You're going to find these things they're not very hard to avoid them. It's like, we'll get to them probably next week or the week after that, some of these things. The point about, and you'll see why it is. Many of the things in the Torah that says our idol worship, that even death penalties to that, are things that are just not, they don't exist today. But it's mentioned in the Torah because it was common.
Yes.
So
I like the way you've explained some history.
The reason why we talk about the issue of swearing is very important to understand is because that's based on the Tosfos in Sanhedrin. And that's where the whole discussion comes about as to whether belief in Shittif is allowed or not, on that Tosfos. Now, in general, what we find is that the Sephardim do not agree with Tosfos. Tosfos from Ashkenaz, from Europe. So the Sephardim did not agree with him. Okay? But in the European countries, you'll find that the majority of you, like the Minchas Chinuch, obviously, is there, the majority of you says that, yes, a non-Jew can swear to an idol. There's no prohibition of doing that. Okay? Now,
why would you want to, though?
Well, it comes about. What Tosfos is talking about here is the Talmud says to us that Rav Shmuel said that you're not allowed to go into business together with a non-Jew because if something happens and you go to a court, the non-Jew is going to swear by their God, and you're not allowed to do something that forces a non-Jew to mention his idol. So the discussion goes about, what about today where we're living among Christians, okay, who are avodah b'shittif. They don't believe in idols like that. They believe in shittif, as I tried to explain to you before. Shittif is much more sophisticated. It's not simple idolatry. In Tanakh, I'll explain to you why it is idolatry. Not much different from that, but it is somewhat different. So he says, well, no, that's the Tosfos says it's like this. He says when they're praying b'shittif, what's going on is they really mean God too. They really mean God. They just have another name. They'll mention Jesus, but they mean God. They mean the Father also.
God plus. It's like having an idolatrous or
right.
adulterous.
Remember, you're evangelical. The Catholic Church, what do they say? They don't say they don't pray in Jesus' name. They pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, all of them together.
Yeah.
So
I
even
attended Catholic school for a number of years.
okay, right, so you know a little bit what I'm talking about. Okay,
Oh yeah.
my
Yeah,
introduction to theology, was from a Catholic, and then I go into all this stuff, and that's how I get. Okay, so with their belief, again, when talking about shittif, we're talking about what Catholics believe. Okay, and that is when they pray the Holy Trinity, meaning they bring together Jesus, the Word, with that meaning God, meaning the Father. Father is God. Father, So the question is that allowed? And they say because they mean God, they mean Shem Shemayim, they mean heaven, they mean the Father, they mean God, then Tosfos says it's not a problem. And then he brings a few other reasons as to why it's not a problem. That's one of them. Number one, we don't find that there's a prohibition for a Jew to make somebody say his idol. Okay? But shittif is not the same thing. Again, as I explained to you what the theology is, it's not the same thing as your idol worship who believes in Zeus and all these kinds of Jupiter and all these kinds of. It's somewhat different, since it's not the same. We don't have any place that says that you're not allowed to make an oath. You're not allowed to make someone to pronounce their shittif, the belief in shittif. So if I go a Catholic and he says Father, Son, Holy Spirit, there's nothing wrong with me to say that. But if I go to a Hindu and I make him mention his God's name, then I'm violating the Torah, because they're two different things. Okay, so we have no place where it says I'm not allowed to do that, so there wouldn't be a problem with it. And he also brings a third reason to that. So there's no question of, you're not allowed to put a stumbling block. So, for example, I couldn't give you Avram and Achai. I couldn't give you a limb from an animal because I'm making you eat something directly. Okay, so there's a question of whether there's no prohibition for this, and he says here that Ben Noach is not warned about this at all. Whether he means in shittif or whether he means, being making swearing a shittif, that's what's going to come out later on. It's a different discussion. I'm not going to go into all of that because it's not so much of the issue now. But again, that's the source of Tosfos. So where it comes in, where we actually see it, is we finally get into Shulchan Aruch, where the question, are you allowed to swear or not? This is all tied into the concept of shittif. If you're not allowed to do it even today, then obviously shittif belief would be forbidden, because it's considered idolatry and you're not allowed to swear. But if it's something a little bit different and it's not the same problem, so it's something different. So we see in Shulchan Aruch 156, it says here, the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, what he says, the Yizum Mishtatev im HaKittim. Kittim is another name for non-Jews. Shema Yischa, you're not allowed to make a shittim. You're not allowed to join together with them in a business. Shema Yischayev Rosh Shviyah, because maybe he will have to make an oath that you should make it be announced on your name. Meaning that according to the Beis Yosef, even for them to say shittif would be forbidden, because they're forbidden for that. Okay, which means we understand also has to be the belief is also forbidden. So that's that. However, the Ramah brings from Tosfos, Tosfos that no, they're not warned about that, whatever. Now there are quite a number of European poskim who disagree. Now, one thing about the point I want to make with the Ramah, even though the Ramah says that there's not a prohibition of swearing or the belief part of it, the service, the avoided part of it is. So, for example, in Yeridea, in Shulchan Aruch, he says, "Kol tzelumim shel avodah zua." All crosses are idols. Okay, what is it? He says clearly the cross is considered an idol. Now he's talking about the Catholic one, the one with had the guy on top of it, standing.
Yeah, with the INRI or.
Yeah. Okay, that's what he's talking about. That one. Now the Ramah holds from that it is allowed. So there's not a direct prohibition for shittif, because there's no death penalty involved in it whatsoever, and swearing by it is allowed. All these other things that seem to indicate from Tosfos that would mean that it's not forbidden. It means it's not saying that it's true or anything like that. It means it's just not something that you become forbidden for. Whereas there are a considerable number, I can give a whole list of them, Noahide, a huge number of poskim that we have who actually forbid it also, just like the Sfardim. So the majority actually forbids shittif, which is why I always say that shittif is actually forbidden. But there are views. But again, one of the points to understand about that is the issue is whether it is a prohibition of avodah zarah or not. Okay? There's no difference. If you hold it is, then it's forbidden. If you don't hold it isn't. There's no such thing to say it's a advantage to do something. It doesn't make you better or worse. It just happens to be what halachic view. So if you eat certain types of food, in Judaism, there's a lot of things like that. There's certain people who have a custom to do certain things this way. So it doesn't mean one's better than the other. The same thing as this. When it comes to shittif, it's not a question of be one better than the other. It's a question is, do the sources say you're allowed to or not? And so if you have a rabbi who's from, European, you will most likely hear from him that there's no prohibition for a non-Jew to believe in shittif, because it's not really actual avodah zarah.
It's only worship.
Yeah, right. Even though for us we're not forbidden with a death penalty, we're forbidden with something else, whatever. But you're not allowed to believe it. Whereas Ashkenazim, you'll find Ashkenazim, some say they are allowed to because of the Mu, whatever. Some will say you're not allowed to because of the majority. That's going to be, you'll find that. But the bottom line on that is if you, those who say that it's not avodah zarah, okay, that are allowed to, don't think you're being any more religiouser if you don't believe in it. It's just, the person who believes it they're not doing anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. But
that's usually the problem especially for those coming out of Christianity.
Yeah.
Is they're so stuck in the mindset of being more religious that when you explain something like, oh well, I could be more religious if I don't, and they drag along the baggage of rite and ritual.
It's what is allowed, what's not allowed, and that again. My view that I always teach, as far as that's concerned, is I always try and follow the majority of all. I happen to know that my Rebbe, for example, once mentioned actually 7 laws of Noah, and he mentioned the Ramud, that in fact shittif is not forbidden for that, because that's the majority view in Ashkenaz. We're Ashkenazim, from European. That's fine. But when I teach according to what's the majority view. I don't try and teach my own particular thing, because I believe we should be teaching Noahides what the majority view is. The majority view is that it's actually forbidden, so you shouldn't do it. If you're going to be Noahide, you shouldn't. And I know actually of no teacher of Noahides who will tell a Noahide, you can believe in shittif. It's no big deal.
Yeah, my experience was they would logically tutor you out of. If they're on the right path.
Dan, you have to remember one thing is, first of all, we don't usually run into too many people who actually believe in shittif. They believe actually in straight avodah zarah, because they come out of evangelical Christianity and they don't learn this stuff. So what they're believing isn't shittif. It's actually idol worship. Okay? When the Ramu is talking, he's really talking about shittif, which is what Catholics, the Catholic theology, what they have, which is a little bit more sophisticated, a little more difficult. And again, I told him when I do it tonight, I will explain to you why it is actually idolatry. That's why a Jew is actually forbidden, because it is idolatry. I'll explain to you what it is. But as far as this, what I'm trying to do here is concerned, you have to understand, the most of the people that I run into who are evangelicals, they never believe shittif in their life, because they don't even know what shittif is. They never believed it. So it's another question of telling them not to believe something, because they never believed in shittif. They always believed in something which was idolatry.
Yeah.
Okay?
I found mostly.
But if you come to a Catholic person who really knows his theology, and I have run into them, by the way, then with them, or somebody an Orthodox, who knows his theology, what it is and stuff like that, and can explain it, understands the underpinnings from it, the theological something. You run into something like that, You talk to a person like that, and you talk to him about that, then he actually believes in shittif. So then the question really comes up. But in general, the people who are listening to this, I don't think there'll even be maybe one or two people which the question of shittif even it relates to them, because they never believed in shittif anyways. They always believed in idolatry. They never believed in shittif.
I sadly, Rabbi, I have met many Noahides that seem to be carrying the baggage, remnants, and trying to be tutored out of letting Torah do the work in their minds. They understand that the idolatry is wrong, but I think you've really clarified some lines of it's not this, it's not that, it is this, and it is that, and a lot of them come out of it, and they may say this. I find when they're so spiritually minded, sometimes they're not of much earthly good. And with a lot of Judaism, the mitzvahs being something you factually do, a lot of them still have difficulty. I hate to say it, and
Yeah.
I see them a few years later, and they're still looking for some spiritual experience
Mm-hmm.
that has the scent of the reminiscent remnants of Shituf. It's sad to say, and
Again, evangelicals do not believe in genuine shittif. I would have to speak to you to find out if you do, but generally, the people who come out of Christianity who never believed in shittif. Okay, that is, I think, one of the mistakes of people who are teaching, because they see it's talked about in Tosfos, talk about here shittif, that that's what Christians believe, and they don't recognize that that's what Christians believed before the Reformation. But after the Reformation, when all these theological ideas got basically ignored because it was Catholicism, except for churches like the Anglican Church and the Lutheran Church, stuff like that. But most evangelicals have nothing to do with that. So most of the lay people never believed in shittif because they've never been taught that. Okay,
so in a nutshell, clarify the target. What is the element that makes the Shituf what it is? What is it that a person does if they're believing in Shituf? What is the element that they're ascribing?
well, they ascribe to Jesus as if he was a totally different person than the Father.
Yet equal to.
Equal but different. In a fundamental, almost
Which
in a physical manner, different from the
which,
Father.
which in essence draws away.
Well, that's straight polytheism.
Yeah.
What's the difference between believing Hercules and Zeus and believing Jesus and the Father? Are two different, both gods in a sense, and just different. There's no difference between that and what your evangelical believes. Whereas a Catholic doesn't believe that, has a different type of belief, because he understands, at least those who understand, maybe some people don't understand, but those who understand have heard from their priests, the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that they're somehow not separated. There's no real separation. You'll never hear a Catholic, priest talking about, just Jesus alone, without talking in the sense of the Trinity as being one. Okay. Now, what I like to do, it's almost 9 o'clock. The question is, now that we finished shittif, the next thing is to talk about those things that are commandments we know, which have a death penalty to them, which are relate to idol worship. So you get an idea of actually those, we talked about the general things of idol worship, but different kinds of things that are considered part of idol worship, and you are permitted to do because it's part of idol worship. Okay? Now, excuse me. Maybe we should see if there's a question, because since it's almost 9 o'clock, I don't even think I'll be able to finish the first one.
It's actually been very quiet in the post tonight, Rabbi. I did put a comment out there. If anybody has any questions or pertinent questions, relevant questions, feel free to ask. We've had okay crowd even on Facebook tonight. Anybody on Facebook or YouTube, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in there now for Rabbi, relevant to this question of idolatry, of belief in a shituf. It's a great chance to ask the Rabbi a direct question. So the best way I could say, like, I'm very familiar with the changes after the Reformation from Martin Luther, and then Wesleyanism, and how all that moved on from there, and there was differences of ideas and branches. But it's now you're saying that Shituf has to do with the way the Catholics ascribe
Right.
the Trinity
Right.
in oneness, is what you're
Yes.
saying.
When they were talking about it, they were actually talking about that because when they were encountering Catholics, which is what when they talked about Christians, they weren't talking about your Baptist and your Protestant and your whatever like that. They were talking about basically Catholicism in Europe. Okay, and those people that they encountered, they knew what their beliefs were. They knew they were idolatrous, and as far as for Jew to believe such a thing like that, it was prohibited. But it was not. Um, it's not what your evangelical on the street believes. And I've discussed with a lot of people, even pastors and messianic rabbis and stuff like that. These guys have no clue.
Are we talking pre-printing press?
Well, yeah, pre-printing press, but even after the Catholic Church still believes what it believed then. It didn't change. The Reformation Church has changed.
Well, I know that there's a lot of them that do actually have roots diverged from Catholicism that actually
Oh,
go
they all
back
came out. They all
into
came
the
out.
Dark Ages.
They all come out of there eventually.
Well, yeah, we know that by the
Reformation,
1500s.
Reformation was specifically in Western Europe. So the Greek for example, the Orthodox Church in the East does not have any kind of Reformation whatsoever. There was never a Reformation in the East. Reformation was only in the West. There's a lot of historical things that brought it about. They weren't. The differences were not originally from the kind of theological things that you think they were. That wasn't where it came from. That's why Lutheranism is very close to Catholicism in a lot of things. Because
Yeah, he was a
yeah, he was a reformer because there were things in the church that
his 95 thesis. Yeah.
Okay, but that's not what the story is. When we're talking about here, we're talking about the significant. Again, if you walked into any church and you'd ask them about to explain what the Trinity means, with incarnation, you would eventually hear basically something that sounds like which is basically idolatry. It would come out that Jesus and the Father are two different persons.
Yeah, I think you're 100%
Now,
right.
by the way, the reason why that comes about is, of course, because that's what's in the New Testament. I'll get into that also in my Tanakh talks.
Yeah, and like I said, I wasn't able to catch it live, but I was able to catch your latest one just before this broadcast.
Oh yeah, that's fun. I'm having a lot of fun. That's a fun one.
Well, we appreciate all your sharing. I just enjoy your knowledge when it comes to history and the flow of time. And the way I look at it is, there's when somebody's building a house, you put one brick on top of another brick, and you can't say it wasn't man-made. And there's quite a different thing when you talk about the deliverance of Hashem, through the Red Sea. You started off talking earlier about one point, and I'd heard Rabbi Goldberg shared the other night about one statement to Abraham, where he called Abraham, and Abraham said, "Here I am." And since the time of the fall, there was nothing mentioned in Torah until that time of Abraham that a human answered, even with Noah and everybody mentioned back to Cain had some conversation, but when God called Abraham, Abraham said, "Here I am," and there was a communication, there was a change, there was something that began that was real and genuine, and then I don't know when we talk about Shituf today. Is there one thing that you can say that is the actual remedy?
Well, again, those who come out of evangelical Christianity have to recognize that they believe basically in idolatry. It's not even a question about that. They definitely worshipped idolatrously. I mean, that's not a question about that either. Okay, unless they really spend time learning theology with the creeds and everything where that comes out of, they probably have no idea really what these beliefs really were supposed to mean and what shituf means. So it's like, sometimes you hear people say, well, shituf this. The question I always ask is, well, explain to me what you think shituf means. And usually you find that they don't understand what it meant. So That's it. I think we should wrap it up for the day.
Well, Rabbi, I want to thank you again for another
Yeah,
class.
next Tuesday we will continue. Next Tuesday we will go through um, in the Torah. There are certain commandments, certain prohibitions relating to idol worship, for which there are death penalties, and those all sources in the Talmud says clearly, and all sources agree that those would apply to a non-Jew also, as being part of the definition of what it means idol worship. Now remember again, I want to make this point because I forgot to make it beforehand. There is one commandment for Noahide called idol worship. The only questions we're discussing now is, well, what constitutes idol worship? Now, if you do all these things at once, it's still just one act of worshiping an idol. Okay? We're going to see all kinds of different things. It's only one act, okay, of worshiping an idol. It's not like multiple acts. We'll get into others. When we get into sexual morality, we'll talk about how you can do the Torah law for a Jew is you can do one act and violate. It talks about all. I'm reading a tractate which is talking about something different, where it talks about doing one act and making multiple violations because of a single act. Okay, that doesn't exist by Noahide. You do one act, one violation. That's it. Even if it would be covered by 15 different commandments in the well, I think the maximum is 6 actually. 5 or 6, I think, is the maximum where you can do a single act with the 5 or 6 commandments at a time. But for Noahide, it doesn't make a difference. Only one act, one thing. Okay.
Rabbi, can you take a stab at a question? Because, we're getting one person, and I know that they're coming out of Christianity, and their concerns is that the whole Noahide movement is aiming to chop the heads off of Christians, and they're going on and on about what's the penalty for idolatry. And then throwing comments like, "Don't you worship the serpent god?" And I guess my head's going to be chopped off. And these are things I said I would clip, but in reality, I just know that there's a neurosis there. There's a neurotic behavior that has got an implanted notion that says, "Wait a second, is not Almighty God Almighty God?" And stop idolatrous behavior. Understand and define what idolatrous behavior is. I'm trying to talk.
Why didn't you
audience.
ask me those questions, the point the person was making? I'll try to answer it, and then I'll go for the night. I think you mentioned something about the serpent. The serpent is, of course, in the Torah. The serpent was not an object of worship. It was a symbol of, and it was something that happened in the desert. Remember, in the desert, what happened? The serpents came out and bit people. So the serpent they made the serpent. So as you remember, they think about this is the serpent that happened. You think about God, and God will take the serpents away. What happened is later on, that wasn't destroyed. It was around there later. I think Hezekiah destroyed it later on, but it had been around. And then some people foolishly made it into an idol and started worshiping it. When it was seen it was made into an idol worship, it was destroyed. But there's no place that it says you're allowed to do it. It was actually forbidden. That's why they destroyed it later on.
Right.
But
So, Rabbi,
the original person was not idolatrous.
Okay, but that serpent cult you're talking about is not the Hebrew word for being joined to the serpent, leviton, joined to levi, ton serpent, and they used to use that symbol of the joined serpent eating its tail, and
I think Leviathan.
Yeah, well, that's where
that's something different. That's totally has nothing to do with it.
I just find conspiracy theory. I've studied conspiracy theory in general from A to Z.
Dan, let me put it very simple because it is getting late and I do want to stop.
Sure.
What you find a lot of times I see with these guys coming out of evangelical Christianity who have no concept of actually what actually appears in the Tanakh, whether it's stories or anything like that. So they come with all kinds of strange things but have no reality of what's there. Just like with the serpent. Yeah, there's a story in the serpent that was put up there. It was put up as a sign to remember that Hashem is going to stop this thing. Later on, hundreds of years later, somehow a cult was developed around it. When that cult took root, that serpent was destroyed.
There you go. Yeah,
that's what happened.
Thank you for clarifying that, Rabbi. I do appreciate you so much. I appreciate the class. I'm thankful for the years and years and years of study you have. So same time we're aiming for next Tuesday?
Same time.
Hashem willing. So folks, next week we'll catch you then. Have a great week.
All right.